I never thought I'd see the day when my own son's home would become a battlefield, and his wife would be the enemy. People say greed destroys families. I used to think that was an exaggeration. But as I stand in the ruins of my son's happiness, I know it's the cruelest truth life ever taught me. My name is Margaret Williams, 70 years old, once known in this city as the Queen of Law. But now, I'm just a mother watching everything I love fall apart. It all began after the accident. My son, Michael, a kind and gentle teacher, was hit by a drunk driver on his way home from work. He survived, but his legs were severely injured, and the doctor said he might never walk again. Our home turned into a place of quiet sorrow. Yet, the real pain didn't come from his wounds, it came from Jessica, his wife, whose smile had always seemed too perfect. In the early days, she pretended to care, holding his hand when people visited, spoon-feeding him soup, whispering false words of love. But as soon as the guests left, the mask slipped. "You can't even move properly anymore, Michael. Do you expect me to live like this forever?" she said one night, her voice dripping with disgust. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. That grief made people cruel. But my hope shattered the morning I heard her whispering on the phone. "Yes, the house is in his name," she said softly, "but I'll find a way. Once I get the papers signed, it's mine." My blood ran cold. She wasn't just angry, she was planning something. That house wasn't just Michael's. It was our legacy, the home we built together after his wedding. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, the flickering light from the fireplace danced across the old family photograph on the mantel. Michael's little smile from his childhood pictures stared back at me, innocent and trusting. I couldn't tell him what I'd heard, not yet. His spirit was already broken, and another blow might destroy him completely. But deep within me, something old and powerful began to awaken. For years, I had buried my past, my career, my instincts, my fire. I had become a quiet grandmother, baking cookies and tending roses. But Jessica's greed had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated the woman who once won every courtroom she entered. When I saw her handing papers to a man in a black suit that evening, my heart steadied, and my voice turned cold. "You think I'm weak," I whispered, watching from the window. "But I've fought men far more dangerous than you." That night, I went into my study and opened the drawer that hadn't been touched in 15 years. Inside lay my old leather briefcase, dusty, worn, but still full of power. As I ran my fingers over it, I felt the fire return. Jessica had no idea who she was playing with. The Queen of Law was about to return. And this time, it was personal. The next morning, sunlight filled the house, but it couldn't touch the coldness that had settled inside these walls. Michael sat in his wheelchair near the window, watching the birds he once used to feed every morning. His hands trembled as he tried to hold a mug of coffee. But Jessica didn't even glance at him. "You're spilling it again," she muttered, scrolling through her phone. I stood by the kitchen counter, watching every move, my heart twisting in silence. He looked up at her with eyes full of quiet pleading, eyes of a man who had lost not just his strength, but his dignity. "Jess, could you?" he began softly. "Don't call me that," she snapped. "You sound pathetic." The words sliced through him like glass. I wanted to shout, to defend him, but I bit my tongue. The time to act was coming, but not yet. I needed to know everything first. That afternoon, while Jessica went out for her yoga class, I slipped into the study she'd started locking recently. My old instincts returned as I picked the lock with a hairpin. The moment the door clicked open, I saw files spread across the desk, property papers, medical insurance, and a signed power of attorney. My son's trembling signature sat at the bottom. My breath caught. She'd made him sign over control of everything, while he was still recovering and medicated. My fingers shook as I traced his signature, imagining her cold smile as she tricked him. A pain far deeper than anger tore through me. How could a woman destroy the man who once worshipped her? I took photographs of every document, every signature, and placed everything back exactly as I found it. When she returned that evening, I watched her greet Michael with fake tenderness, a mask she wore so effortlessly. But she didn't know I had seen behind it. She didn't know the lawyer in me was awake again. Days turned into weeks and my quiet investigation continued. I began recording her phone calls, her late-night meetings, every cruel word she spoke when she thought no one was listening. Michael grew thinner, quieter, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I would find him staring at his wedding photo, her in white, him smiling with hope that now seemed like a cruel joke. One night, I found him crying silently, his face hidden in his hands. I sat beside him and placed my palm on his head, just like when he was a child. "You haven't lost everything, my son," I whispered. He didn't know what I meant, but I did. The war had already begun, quietly, invisibly. Jessica's greed had burned the last bridge between us. But she forgot one thing: when you try to steal from a wounded lion, you don't just face the lion, you awaken the one who raised it. That night, I sat in front of my computer, printing the evidence I'd gathered. The sound of the printer filled the silence like a ticking clock before a storm. I looked at my reflection in the screen, the wrinkles, the tired eyes, and yet, behind them, the same woman who once fought for justice was alive again. I whispered to myself, "This house will not fall. Not while I'm still breathing." Outside, Jessica laughed on the phone, unaware that her own downfall had already been set in motion. The Queen of Law had taken her first step, and there was no turning back. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house became unbearable. Jessica's cruelty grew bolder with every passing day. She no longer hid her disgust for Michael, she paraded it. "You can't even take care of yourself, Michael," she sneered one morning, waving a stack of unpaid bills in his face. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to be married to someone who can't even walk?" Michael's hands trembled. His lips quivered, but he said nothing. He just stared down at his lap, defeated. I stood in the doorway, my blood boiling, every word cutting through me like fire. That night, when Jessica left to meet her friend, I went to Michael's room. He sat there in silence, staring at the floor. His once bright eyes looked hollow. "Mom," he whispered, "maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just a burden." My heart broke. "No, my son," I said, kneeling beside his wheelchair. "You're not a burden. You're a victim of someone's greed, and I won't let that destroy you." He looked at me confused. I smiled faintly and said, "Trust me, Michael. I know what I'm doing." That night, I followed Jessica in my old car. She drove across town and parked in front of a fancy restaurant. From a distance, I saw her laughing, leaning across the table toward a man I didn't recognize. He wasn't just anyone, he was the same man in the black suit I'd seen before. The man handling the property documents. My suspicions hardened into certainty. She wasn't just trying to take the house, she was planning a new life, selling everything behind Michael's back. I clicked photos from my phone, capturing every smirk, every touch, every glass of wine they shared. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, manipulation, and cruelty, all wrapped in one poisonous smile. When I returned home, Michael was still awake. "Mom, where were you?" he asked weakly. I looked at him for a long moment, wanting to protect him from the truth, but he deserved to know. I sat beside him and showed him the photos. His hand covered his mouth as tears filled his eyes. She's with him," he whispered. I nodded slowly. He broke down, sobbing, and I held him as his body shook. "She said she loved me," he cried. "She said we were a team." My own tears fell silently. "She lied, Michael. But the time for tears is over. Now it's time for justice." Over the next few days, I gathered every piece of evidence: the fake documents, the secret bank transfers, and the photos of her meetings. Then I called an old friend from my law days, Judge Raymond Clark, a man who once told me, "Margaret, the courtroom bows to truth, not emotion." When he heard my story, his voice turned grave. "Bring everything to me." Quietly, he said. By the end of that week, I had everything ready. Jessica still believed she was winning. She smiled at me like a queen walking among servants. She had no idea I had already filed a petition to freeze all property transactions. The trap was set. One evening, she entered the living room holding a legal envelope, pretending to care. "Michael, honey," she said sweetly, "just sign this last paper. It's for insurance." I stepped forward, my voice calm but cold. "Why don't you tell him what it really is, Jessica?" Her face froze. Her smile faltered. What do you mean?" she stammered. I took out the same document she'd hidden, along with the photos, and placed them on the table. "You've been selling your husband's home and planning to leave him penniless. I have every piece of proof." Michael's eyes widened in horror. Jessica's mask shattered completely. How did you?" she whispered. I met her gaze steadily and said, "You thought you were clever, But you forgot who I am." Her lips trembled, her confidence fading as she realized the walls were closing in. "You can't prove anything," she snapped desperately. I smiled, calm, collected, deadly. "We'll see about that," I said. In court, the day of the trial arrived with a storm brewing in the gray October sky. Rain lashed against the courthouse steps as I wheeled Michael through the crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. He looked fragile, his hands trembling on the armrests, but there was something new in his eyes, the faint spark of hope. Jessica stood at the entrance, dressed in an elegant black coat, her lips curled into that same proud, poisonous smile. She thought this was just another show, that her beauty and tears would fool the court the same way they fooled my son. But not today. Today, truth had teeth. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with whispers. The judge, old and solemn, raised his eyes and said, "Mrs. Margaret Williams, representing your son, you may begin." I rose slowly, feeling the weight of 15 long years lift from my shoulders. As I looked around, I saw Jessica glance nervously toward her lawyer. She didn't know that every lie she'd told was about to crumble. I began with my voice steady and calm. "Your Honor," I said, "this case isn't just about property. It's about betrayal, manipulation, and the destruction of a man's dignity by the person who vowed to protect him." Then I laid out every piece of evidence, the forged documents, the hidden bank transfers, the photos of her with her secret partner. Each item hit the courtroom like thunder. Jessica's face drained of color, her mask cracking under the weight of truth. "This is nonsense," she shouted, standing up, her voice trembling. "He signed those papers willingly." The judge's gavel struck hard. "Sit down, Mrs. Williams," he ordered. But I didn't look at her. I looked at my son, the man. She broke and said softly, "Michael, tell the court what she said to you the night after your accident." His voice shook as he spoke. "She told me I was worthless, that she wished I hadn't survived." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, not of regret, but of fear. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "The truth is clear," he said gravely. "Continue, Mrs. Williams." I took a deep breath and delivered my final blow. "Your Honor, this woman attempted to seize a disabled man's property under false pretenses. She used deceit and emotional abuse to manipulate him. But greed always leaves a trail, and justice always finds it." I stepped closer to the bench and placed my final piece of evidence, a recorded phone call. The courtroom fell silent as Jessica's voice echoed through the speakers. "Once I sell the house, I'll disappear with the money. He'll never see me or that old woman again." The silence that followed was unbearable. Jessica broke down, her arrogance collapsing into screams. "No, it's not what it sounds like." But it was too late. The judge's voice thundered. "The court finds Jessica Miller guilty of fraud, emotional abuse, and property manipulation. All assets are to be restored to Michael Williams. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel struck. It was over. Jessica's face went pale as officers approached. She turned toward me with wild eyes. "You ruined me," she hissed. I looked at her one last time and said quietly, "No, Jessica. You ruined yourself the day you forgot what love meant." She was led away, crying, and for the first time in months, I felt peace. Outside, the storm had cleared, and the sun broke through the clouds. Michael looked up at me, his eyes red but full of gratitude. "Mom, you saved me." I smiled through tears. "No, my son," I whispered. "I just reminded them who you are." As we left the courthouse, the reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing, but I didn't stop. I didn't need fame or victory. I had my family back. That night, back home, Michael sat by the window as the evening light poured in. He looked stronger somehow, as if the chains had finally fallen. I stood behind him, watching quietly. My eyes drifted to the old briefcase on the table, the same one I once opened in silence. I smiled softly. Justice had spoken. The Queen of Law had returned, and she had won her final case, not for glory, but for love.